What is up, everybody? It's Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show. As always, I'd like to say you're blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles, and a solution for someone's problem. This is the home of Epic Conversations, and I'm the host of Epic Conversations 2018 award winner in the innovation category given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. And we always like to have new friends coming on the Dr. Vibe show, home of Epic Conversations. And this gentleman, I guess, visually is a new friend. Last week, he came on audio-wise. Well, yeah, audio-wise and text message-wise to a conversation I was having. And I said, well, we got to get him on here because he's ready to rumble, ready to go. Not rumble, I'm just joking. Just joking. We have Matthew Solomon. He is known as the coach for the modern soul. His vision for the modern era is one that is rooted in the understanding that everything is based on relationships, whether they be romantic, familiar, corporate, or otherwise. From this space, Matthew stands with you in creating the life and experience that you truly desire. He's a coach and author, and with his regular appearances on over 30 TV, radio, and web podcasts, he has facilitated healing and transformation for individuals, couples, families, colleagues, and corporations. Matthew is going to be chatting with us tonight about the state of men at the end of the decade. And for those who've been keeping up with Dr. Vibe recently, I've been having a number of conversations, the state of at the end of the decade, ... So this one is going to be the state of men at the end of the decade. I've had a few conversations of state of men and state of Black women. So this is another one that's adding to the pile of pancakes. So we'd like to welcome for the first time and not the last time, Mr. Matthew Solomon. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yes, and it's taken some time for us to finally make it happen, and we're finally making it happen.
Yeah. I laughed at the Rumble thing. I got my MMA gloves on.
There you go. Rumble. Well, Great bio about yourself. But I'd love if you could share with our audience a little bit of your early days, where you grew up, life, etc., before you became this outstanding coach.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, where I'm at has all been a product of my life. My life has not been linear. I've taken lots of twists and turns. I grew up in the West Hollywood part of Los Angeles, and I had what I found out recently was a very unique experience in that the schools that I went to were very integrated. It was every race, religion, sexual orientation. My friends, a lot of whom I'm still friends with from junior high and high school, are everybody. And we all get together and we all comment how we had a really unique experience growing up. And so as a straight white male growing up in and around West Hollywood and Los Angeles, and friends who lived in South LA and were bussed in and we would hang out. I saw very early on that my experience and how I was related to was different from my friends. And, at times it was very obvious, at times it was very subtle. This is stuff that I still, as a straight white male, get to unpack, and realize where, biases that I have or ways that I've grown up. But in growing up in that environment with those friends, I was always curious about why are things the way that they are. Like, if we're supposed to live in a country that is, where everyone is created equal, why isn't it that way? And actually, I'm Jewish, and when I would go to Hebrew school, which was in Beverly Hills, so I was an outsider there. Like, I didn't fit in there, and so I've always had this curiosity about what's become, to be the word inclusion, but like us feeling connected, us being equal, us being able to relate to each other. And growing up at that time, when I went into college, I went to USC, University of Southern California, and
I'm jealous. That's my all-time favorite football team. They're not that great. They're not that great right now.
Yeah, so back then they were pretty good. They were pretty good back then. But I was going to USC, which is downtown LA, and that was the time of the Rodney King beating, the LA riots, the OJ trial, so all of this, cultural uprising and upheaval that I, again, being a white male in West Hollywood, wasn't exactly privy to, but I knew something was going on. When that erupted, it was like, oh, there's more to this, And so at that time at USC, I was a music major, but I got really interested in sociology and anthropology and comparative religion and social structure and institutional racism and all of that. And so even though I was in the arts, I was in music and then a filmmaker, I always had an ear for, I guess, social justice is what it's, become to be called. And then personal and professional development and like going, seminars on relationships and partnership building and all of that. And so like it's all been it like stepping back, it all makes sense how I got here. Going through it's like how did I wrote a book? When did I write a book? But it was really a product of things that were going on and I've always been a creative, so that's just how I express myself, whether it was music or writing movies or directing movies or ultimately a book and articles, which is what I'm doing.
So thank you for sharing some of that. I just want to stay there for a few moments. Was diversity, how can I put it? When you were growing up, what was your family's thoughts on diversity? Because you said you were in a diversity environment. Was that something that your parents accepted? Were they with it? Were they not with it? How did they handle that?
No, they, I'm so grateful because my parents are both retired school teachers, and they taught for the Los Angeles Unified School District for 40 years. And they were very inclusive-minded, diverse-minded. And so the schools that I went to, so second grade, I'm like, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old. And most of my friends, that school was 75% Black. And most of my friends spoke, in what we would call slang back then. It's what we called slang back then, but with the dialects and y'all and the N-word and all of that. And so that's how all my friends spoke. So I would come home speaking that way, and my parents, very lovingly were like, it's not okay for us to talk like that because that's not how we talk, and it would be offensive to somebody who's Black for you to show up in their home speaking that way.
Okay.
And so it was like, okay, cool. It was like a very clear lesson, and that was it. So they were very aware. Is my point, and very welcoming and all of that. The only thing, being Jewish and of that generation is my parents always wanted me to marry somebody who was Jewish, and so that was a thing because my sixth grade crush was a Black woman named LaShawn Davison, who I was like, she's hot. And my parents were like, well, she's not Jewish, and if she was Jewish, that would be okay. And so that was something that I ended up having to navigate throughout my life. And yeah,
good stuff. How did you get into the world of coaching?
Yeah, that's another twist and turn. So in my personal development journey, I was always coaching people. People would come to me. Like I taught martial arts for years. I was in seminars and programs, and either people would informally come to me for advice, or the programs were set up where there were coaches and then there were participants. And so I was always kind of doing that, and I was always kind of that person for my friends and for people that I worked with. And then a few years ago, I was meditating as part of my daily practice, and what came up in my meditation, what I heard was, a lot of shit about a lot of shit, and you need to be sharing it with people. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to coach. And so I announced it on Facebook, and I had some clients show up, and it just kind of took off from there.
Okay. Uh, we'll get into our conversation.
Mhm.
And myself and Matthew, we've had a number of conversations. So he's not going to be here for a one and done. There's a number of conversations going into 2020 that we're going to have with Matthew. But I thought talking about the state of men at the end of the decade, and actually, maybe you can just share with the audience what you do in regards to you teach a number of courses, etc., on relationships. Can you just give a little background on that for our audience?
Sure. Yeah. So everything that I do is within the realm of relationships and partnership. And so I coach, I have individual clients that I coach, I have couples that I coach, and then I go into organizations. There's a program I'm running at a college right now, and I go into corporations where I run restorative programs, and I teach people how to listen and how to communicate and how to, we all have our filters and stuff in the way. I teach people how to get that out of the way so that we can really connect. And so what I do is I teach people how to connect with each other and do that from a place of we know, like, we're whole and complete within ourselves. And so I approach things from those different angles.
Okay. So when we chose to start off with the state of men at the end of the decade, what thoughts entered your mind before we wanted to go into this journey?
Well, the first thought was, holy shit, it's end of a decade. What was I doing in 2010? And then it was like, wow, it's pretty unreal. 2010, I was married. I had, my kids were very, very little. That was, the housing crisis that I got caught up in. My quest for being a better man was, reading the John Gray Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus books, and David Dado, Way of the Superior Man, and working with mentors. And I was, training heavily in martial arts at that time. And then, over the years, so, so there's been a big shift. It occurs to me like the real uprooting for men has been probably in the last 3 years. I think
And why do you say in the last 3 years?
I'm relating it to the Me Too movement, the online Me Too movement, because I think that's, we've kind of, in my experience and what I can remember, we've kind of been able to go along, pretty easy status quo, and then Me Too movement online happened. And I'll get back to why I'm specifying that in a second. But the Me Too online movement happened, and then all of a sudden, men are on the defensive. It occurs like women are attacking men. There's the conversation about toxic masculinity. There's a conversation about, well, how to, incels and men going their own way, and it's not even worth it to relate. Like, all of that stuff has come up in the last two years, I guess. Maybe it's 2019, so like 2 years.
Right.
And the reason why I say the online movement is, Me Too was started by a woman named Tarana Burke, Black woman named Tarana Burke, in 2006. And so she originally created that platform as a way for women of color who were survivors of rape and sexual abuse to have a platform to share their stories and to get support. And so that movement has been happening, but it wasn't until it was popularized or, made publicized, by Alyssa Milano and Rose McGowan, a couple years ago with Harvey Weinstein and Bill Cosby and all of that. And so, if we get into like the race part of the conversation, it's a tricky subject because it lends itself to the parts of the feminist movement that have dismissed women of color. And so that's a whole other conversation we can get into, but it's just important to just state that. And I always, even in my book, I make it a point to give credit where credit is due, which is Tarana Burke, who started the movement.
So this change that's happened the last 3 years, what were men like in the first 7 years?
Okay, so, men aren't a monolith, right? But no. I think largely, we were just kind of able to do what we wanted to do. You know, we had the consent conversations, which was basically no means no. But then there was also, yeah, sometimes no doesn't mean no. You know, all of our, as a, you know, a white man, all of the movies that I grew up watching, like Revenge of the Nerds and Porky's, and even the Judd Apatow movies that I loved, um, you know, largely were about getting laid and try, and like the what is it, the slacker who succeeds. Like we kind of fall into winning somehow, and we, you know, win over the, you know, the gorgeous woman, but we're just kind of like oafish ourselves. And so I think, you know, largely we were just kind of allowed, you know, we were just kind of able to do whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do you feel like you have a chance to
Mhm.
coach, mentor, be in environments with many men?
Yeah.
And how do you feel men have changed or are changing some? And we're just saying general. Do you see a change in some men? Do you see attitudes changing? And how are they handling the changing times?
I see, yeah, I see, you know, it's everything from, you know, there's definitely men who are embracing the the change in the movement and the opportunity for us to grow and to step into the next phase of what it means to be a a powerful man in society. You know, the new version of protector and provider, creating spaces that are safe, spaces that are nurturing, spaces where there's compassion and empathy. And there's a lot of power in that. There's, you know, the people, the best leaders were the ones that were really connected with, you know, their people, you know. So there's that. There's also the men who, like I remember I was talking to this guy who was in his 60s, and he was like, I wish we could go, you know, just go back to the way it was, you know, when I was a kid, you know, where none of this was happening, you know, none of the sexual harassment and all that. And I was like, well, it was happening, we just didn't hear about it, you know. And so there, you know, there are some men who see the that as glory days where, you know, everything was fine when it really wasn't, you know. And then there are the groups of men who don't want to deal with it, who are, you know, isolating themselves, who are like, well, it's not worth it to go out to a bar to try and meet a woman because I don't want to get accused of something, you know. And so it's always all across the board, you know. There's going
Right.
to be the people who uh, are growth oriented, who want to improve and be better versions of themselves and provide for their communities. Are going to be the people who want to avoid doing anything like that, or just mad that they got to be faced with it. And it you know, it just depends where, you know, these individuals fall in, you know, what groups they fall into.
Okay. You mentioned a very long-standing term with men called protector and provider.
Mm-hmm.
How do you feel that's changed in this decade? Because, of course, there's a traditional protector and provider. Have you noticed some men changing what they think of what that means during this decade?
I think so. You know, protector provider used to mean only that you could fight and you could make a lot of money, you know. And so with women in the workplace, with women in some, in you know, in some relationships, there's, you know, the women are the, you know, the breadwinners, and the men are the, you know, stay-at-home parents, or they're not earning as much. Like when I was married, my wife earned more than I did, you know. And I worked and I did every, you know, did all of that, but she just happened to earn more than I did. And so the, you know, the idea of protector and provider can mean a lot of different things. And so traditionally, like pre, you know, I don't know, the feminist movement, you know, protector and provider was making money. You know,
Right.
the Ward Cleaver comes home and, you know, June's got the got the dinner on.
Exactly.
Now, you know, especially with um just the conversations now, there's such a need across the board for safe spaces, for spaces to be protected, for people to feel like it's okay to share and to speak up and to feel heard. there's just a lot more that's available to us as men. There's a lot more that we can. There's a lot bigger ways that we can show up outside of just earning a lot of money.
So, in your experience, you're seeing now more men wanting to have that safe space to talk about manhood, their daily lives.
Yeah, well, men for sure need that. Everybody needs that, and
Right.
I think it's been slower going for men because we haven't, the way we've been socialized is not to talk about stuff. Is pick yourself up by your bootstraps, suck it up, don't cry. Why are you getting all up in your feelings? All of that, and so when I actually have a chance to work with men and give them the space to say what they need to say, what happens is like the criticism from people who are on the outside is, oh, you're just trying to like pussify men and make them soft. But really what happens is they get a lot stronger. And the men that I've worked with, like their face changes, they get focused, they get, more determined. And when they're in their relationships, in this case with wives, the traditionally we're taught, women are emotional and irrational, and we just got to protect ourselves. But the more that we as men can stand in our power and hold that space and be okay and validate her and accept, who she is and what she's sharing, then she can relax and open up. And so it's not about avoiding those confrontations, which is how I grew up. I grew up with the, don't piss your, your mom off, or don't piss your wife off, or, yes, dear, right? That was the thing, just say yes, dear. But that doesn't really provide connection, right? And so to the extent that we can be with each other, with our partners, and just be in that space, and whatever is said and whatever needs to be shared is okay and welcomed and safe, like then we get to relax and really trust each other. That's when trust is built and partnership is created.
It's interesting. What you're sharing is encouraging.
Mm-hmm.
I know little by little, more and more men are getting there.
Yeah.
And it's just the concern I have of how much socialization impacts, and also one of the things I encounter myself because I work with fathers
Mm-hmm.
is how they were fathered
Yeah.
has a big effect on their manhood.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very, very impacting. So when you say that, so more and more men are speaking, encountering each other. When you speak with men like that, what are they telling you about, how are they handling it?
Mm-hmm.
What was that aha movement saying? You know what? I got to make a turn. I got to U-turn or change the path that I'm going on.
Yeah. The in So in my experience, the aha moment for the men that I've worked with, it comes when they experience a different way and a successful way of interacting with their partner. So, usually it's, I don't know what to do. She's freaking out. I can't take it. I'm afraid to say the wrong thing. I'm afraid to do the wrong thing. And then I'm like, okay, but if you listen to her in this way, and if when she says this, you connect with her feelings and her emotions, and you let her know that you're picking up on how she's feeling, then she's going to soften, and you're going to feel connected. And so then when they do that, usually I get the call of, holy shit, that worked, and this feels so much better. And then they might stumble again, or they might find it, and then they'll be like, wow, I'm doing this thing and things are so much better. So the aha moment comes, I think, for us in large part when we actually do it and experience the difference and experience what's available out of it.
So what you mentioned is how their relationships are changing with their spouses. But does it not take a man to develop the relationship in himself and find some of himself
Yeah.
before he gets to that point? And if that's so, are you noticing a change in that over the last decade?
Right. Well, it's all of that. I teach people to listen. And when I'm working with people, there's always some element of self-discovery that's involved, whether it's meditating or journaling or something. But especially for us as men, to be able to sit in silence for even 5 minutes is immensely powerful. It gives us that sense of who we are. And there's certain meditations that I do that really develop that, so that when we're standing, with our partner and we're listening in that way, we're rooted, grounded in a way that has us not, get taken down. So it's that self-discovery. It's knowing where our edges are. Because sometimes, even for me, there's times where it's too much. And it's like, okay, I need to step away and take a break for a minute, but I'll be back. And just knowing, it's like, know thyself, right? So then, in terms of the, men doing the work, like you were asking, yeah, there are men who do that. There are men who really focus on that part, who are leading men's groups. Because it's, there's the element of us as men where we haven't really had, for the most part, strong role models who embody what it means to be a strong masculine leader, in ways that are ethical and, where there's empathy and compassion, like all of that stuff. I had a teacher 20 years ago who asked me who my archetype as a man was, and I couldn't think of anybody. And I was thinking and thinking and thinking, and finally it was like the father on Little House on the Prairie, to date myself, right? But it was because, he was, strong father, strong husband. He would talk to his daughters and his wife in a loving way. He would go out and get in the fights if he had to. He could build stuff with his hands, all of that. So we, there's the part of us that really wants to develop and stand in our power and provide and create. And then there's the parts of us that are wounded, that are just flat out wounded, how we've been raised, how we've had to, shove down our emotions so far that we don't even know that we have them. We just know that, like, there's anger that comes up, or there's frustration or something. And so we need outlets to be able to process through that, because there's a lot of healing for all of us, but men, we just haven't had that space to do any of that, really.
Okay, and I hear where you're coming from. We haven't had that space. Is it also a combination, and I think you mentioned this before, we haven't been shown how to do that, and also we don't make the time to do it?
Well, yeah. I mean, there's there's a lot of levels, right? It's not it has been told that it is not a priority, that we need to dismiss it and disregard it. And then yeah, so it's like, well, why would I make time? And even, it's funny though, because even clients that I have who are women, when I give them exercises to, be in nature or meditate or, take care of themselves, there's just an overall reluctance socially to take care of ourselves. And that's something, I'm fortunate that I know a lot of other coaches and healers and therapists. So I see people taking care of themselves. I see women doing it. I see men doing it. It's probably, men, men's, our focus has been more in terms of how do we make a lot of money and how do we, find a mate. Right.
Yep.
And so it's easy to be like, I don't have time to get into my emotions. I don't have time to, heal the fact that, my dad wasn't around, or my mom didn't hug me, or whatever, because we don't see the correlation, if it's not putting money in our pocket. But the thing is it kind of helps with that when we start doing that work.
How has the world changed for men when it comes to relationships, in your opinion, over the last 10 years?
Yeah,
because that's you do a lot. Yeah, I really am interested in hearing your perspective on this one.
how has it changed?
or has it changed? Maybe has it changed, and if it has, how has it changed? I don't want to make the assumption first.
Yeah.
How has it changed, and if it has, how has it changed from your experience in regards to coaching, especially couples, and seeing how the men are handling?
Well, I'll say this. The change comes from the people who are actually seeking it out. So I think collectively, it probably hasn't changed much the way, if we're talking about hetero relationships, the way men and women relate with each other, except for the ones who are really, doing work, working with therapists or coaches or reading books on relationships. I think that's very individual. What I will say that I've seen a big shift in is movements like the polyamory, where it's not just monogamous relationships that people are getting into, and people, there've always been polyamorous relationships, but it's more accepted. Certainly in the circles I'm running in, it's very, there's a lot of that. And so I think, in the last few years, for sure, people are exploring that more, exploring what it means to be in an open relationship, exploring what it means to, like, even, I mean, long distance relationships are possible in a way that they didn't used to be because of the internet and FaceTime and all of that. And so I think the biggest change has been in, we're opening up to different ideas of what relationship looks like, at least romantic relationship.
Right. Do you feel that with your experiences in the coaching, are men still, at least some men, still commitment oriented? Because when you say
Oh,
open
mhm.
relationships, first thing that comes up my mind is commitment. Where do they stand through your experience over the last decade in regards to commitment?
Yeah. Well, what's interesting is the couples that I've worked with who are polyamorous, the woman has been the one who wanted to open up the relationship, or who wanted to explore that.
Hmm,
And
interesting.
yeah, and so, I mean, there's certainly a lot of men in the movement, don't get me wrong. And in my
Right.
experience, the partners who have been more apt to do that have been the women in the relationships.
Hmm. Does that surprise you in any way?
Uh, it's funny because I've had this conversation a few times with friends of mine who are poly, and it's something that I had explored myself at one point. To me, it was like, it's the kind of thing that it looks better on paper than in practice. And
Okay.
so was it surprising? A little bit, but also as a man, I know, like, when I'm with somebody, and I had to, uh, figure this out for myself also, and explore, like, what does feel good and what doesn't feel good. And for me, when I'm with somebody, I like to have that container with just that person, and grow and nourish and develop that from there. And it's just harder for me to do that with multiple people. And if I'm really into somebody, I don't really, enjoy the thought of them being with somebody else.
Right.
Now I know men and women and couples who navigate it really beautifully and have amazing relationships with multiple partners. I think it's just a matter of what works for you and what doesn't, and what feels good and what doesn't, and how you want your life to go. But I think that's more of a personal uh, inquiry than anything.
Okay. Okay. If you can take a look at the men that you've communicated with over the last decade,
Mhm.
have you noticed, hearing from them, common challenges that they face? Are there similarities
Yeah.
that come up, similarities that they're of challenges that they are facing?
Yeah, a lot of it is in life purpose, is in the frustration of things not looking the way that we want it to. Navigating relationships. At one point, when I was married, my circle of guy friends, we were that group that would, now, we would sit around and complain, but we were also more, solution oriented. So it wasn't just us bitching about our wives. We were looking for ways to really support ourselves, but we didn't have a lot of the tools and uh, insight that was needed to really make a difference for ourselves and each other at that point. But it's for men, it's living our purpose. It's feeling valued and like we're important. Important in a way where we contribute and where we're needed. And then it's being able to be in relationship and not feeling like an asshole. That was my experience when I was married. I just felt like an asshole. Like I couldn't get anything right. And I was, failing at every turn and nothing was ever good enough. And that has been what I've heard, from men who I've worked with. That's been those are the consistent themes.
Do you feel that it's more difficult than ever now for a man to find his purpose, find his value? And if you feel that, what reasons do you think that they're going through that challenge, especially as we go into a next decade?
Yeah, I would say it's easier now
Oh, okay.
because there are more of us who are talking about that. There are more of us who are focused on that. The way that I work really develops who you're being, not what you're doing. And so much of our history has been about doing. Like you even ask somebody, well, what do you do for a living? What do you do? And really the quickest changes I've seen where men I've worked with, like their faces just change, like, and their structure just changes, has been focusing on who are you being? How do you want to be? What are the qualities that you want to, embody and exude? And so for that, I mean, there's coaches who do that. There's TED Talks on that kind of stuff. There's books. There's, I think it's much more accessible than ever.
Right. It's interesting because I like to be different, and in good ways, that is.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm at a social event, most of the time when you're at a social event, when you meet someone, or in the first question they'll ask is,
What do you
what
do?
do you do?
Yeah.
That's not my first question. I
Mm.
ask, why do you do what you do?
Ah, I love that. Which is so much more powerful, right? Because the why behind it, that's purpose driven.
Yes.
That's the why do I do it? Yeah, that's where our purpose is. And so if we're looking at the why, that's how easy it is to focus on our purpose. That's so beautiful.
Because when you ask them that, they're going to tell you what they do anyways, but it's just a different way. You
Yeah.
want to find out their why. And most of the time when I ask people that, they look at me, that's an alien question.
Yeah.
What do you mean? Why do I do? I just do. I just
Yeah.
do, guy. I just do. I don't think about it. I just go.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
go. Um, how much of a challenge with men do you believe, with a number of men, the whole rise of women, especially in the workplace, in corporate,
Mhm.
over the last decade? How do you, from your viewpoint, how are men handling this shift that has happened over the last decade, especially over the last decade?
Well, how are they handling the shift? So it's interesting, in terms of corporate, right? Because I'm not in the corporate world other than when I come in and
Well,
and
that's what I
lead
mean.
and
Yes.
lead workshops, and having been on movie sets and commercial sets and all of that, where a lot of the producers, like the line producers, were women. Like they're the ones that were running the show and in charge of everything.
Right.
Um, uh, most directors are still men at this point, but when I look at like who's the CEO, that would be the producer. That's like the person in charge. Um, well, I mean, it's so here's the thing. In the ways that we as men haven't had to confront what women deal with on a daily basis, like the harassment, cat calls, earning less, I was in a seminar a couple years ago with a woman named Allison Armstrong, and she asked the group, it was men and women, it was a Saturday morning. She asked the men, how many of you have been legitimately afraid for your life in the last year? You know, and I think there were like one or two hands that went up. And she said, well, what about in the last 3 months? There's nobody. What about in the last week? There's nobody. Then she asked the women the same question. How many of you have been legitimately afraid for your life in the last year? And pretty much every hand went up. And she said, what about 3 months? And there were a bunch of hands up. So what about in the last week? And there were, you know, there was like 10 or 12 hands up. And she said, what about today? And there were 3 or 4 hands that were still up, and it was 10 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. And I'm like, all I did was roll out of bed, take a shower, and go to the seminar, which is probably what they did. And yet there was something that happened that had them experience that level of fear. You know, and it's real because they've had to confront that. And that this is a thing that I've heard from a lot of women, you know. And so, you know, as men in the workplace, you know, we've had the sexual harassment training and all of that, but it doesn't really develop empathy. You know, it's like, don't do this, mostly don't do this. But there's not the why behind it. There's not the what is a woman's experience, because once I know that there's a fear there that she's experiencing that, you know, has to do with years and years and years of experiences, I'm going to be much more, you know, compassionate and willing to be like, oh, well, I'm not going to, you know, come up and talk to her in an elevator face to face where she's got no path out. Or I'm going to be more aware of what I say and how I say it. If I say something, how I'm positioned, you know, and it's not like a whole like scrambling thing trying to figure it out. It just becomes a natural way of being. Right. And so, you know, in the corporate place, how have things changed? I think, you know, if anything, the more that we can recognize the importance of having diverse and inclusive workspaces, whether it's women or people of color or different religions or whatever it is, like it all adds and makes it better. The issue is, again, you know, men, mostly white men, we haven't had to deal with that stuff. You know, it just hasn't been in our face enough. It hasn't been enough of an issue or a requirement to where we actually had to like stop and think about what am I doing and how is that impacting somebody.
In the work that you do you get any exposure to younger men, like men under 30?
Oh yeah. Well, so, you know, I do work at colleges. And so,
Yeah.
yeah.
So what pulse are you getting from them? What are you hearing from them? And is it anything different from those that are over 30?
I mean, mostly, that's a good question. I mean, it is a different pulse. So I'm, you know, in colleges, they're, you know, like 19, 20 ish.
Yep.
And, you know, even with my kids, there's much more of a knowledge and an acceptance and just an ease with differences. Now, I will say that in particular, you know, the white students have the hardest time, you know, navigating, you know, diversity and inclusion conversations. And what's really great is when we can get in and open up those spaces and they can listen to the experience of a Black college student, you know, then the response is, wow, I didn't know that was happening. I'm glad we're having this conversation. You know, so I think, not I think, in my experience, it's easier to have those conversations because there's less history involved and just, you know, these kids are growing up with access to stuff we, you know, like the internet's on your phone, you know.
Yeah.
So there's a lot more where, you know, whereas I had to like go to the library or, you know, look up an encyclopedia, and whoever your community was, that's who you interacted with. Whereas, you know, my kids know people in, you know, South Korea and India and, you know, like all over.
So when you look at those under 30,
Mhm.
and you compared where they're at their age when you were their age,
Mm.
are you optimistic when it comes to the state of manhood when you're for those that are under 30 right now?
Am I optimistic? Whew, that's a tough question.
Because obviously they're looking at those who went
Mhm.
ahead of them, and I think a lot of under 30 saying, you know what, we don't want to be like that, you
Yeah,
know, in different areas. Like, I don't believe in having a permanent job. um I don't believe in examples. I don't believe in having a car.
right,
You know,
right.
I'm going to travel, that
Mhm.
sort of stuff. So I'm just thinking, if you get any pulse on, you know, what where they're at, do you feel when they get to our age,
Yeah.
there's hope for them when they get to our age because they've looked at the challenges and for some of the mistakes that some men have made ahead of them.
Mhm. Well, it's definitely. I mean, I'm optimistic for sure. You know, and I know that at any level, there's the information. There's the, you know, I see. I mean, I do see a lot more people stepping into mentor roles. You know, so that's always good. In fact, at the college that I'm at, there's a whole program for the young men there. It's a mentorship
Oh,
program, and it's like I went to one of their ceremonies, and it was really moving, you know. And it's, you know, they talk about men's issues. They talk, you know, it's everything from how to, you know, create a resume and do a job interview to what it means to be a man and what are the issues that you're dealing with as a man. And so it really is an amazing community that's grown. Like, it started,
yeah.
you know, I think I was trying to remember. I think it was like 5 or 6 men, but now there's like 20, and they it was going to be capped at 16, but the demand has been greater. So like, it's
Wow.
something that's growing.
That's inspiring and encouraging
Yeah,
news.
yeah,
Wow. I'd like to find out more about that.
yeah,
I'm,
sure.
I'm very, very curious to find out, like, how did that come about?
Mhm.
Like, there must have been someone must have pushed the needle
Yeah.
to make that happen because I'm sure that's not at every
No, it's
college.
not. It is something that somebody implemented to make a difference, and it's been making a difference, and it's been huge.
Nice, nice, fantastic.
Yeah.
That's great news to hear. As we're coming down to the winding down
Mm.
of our conversation, um, we're starting a new decade.
Yeah.
We've talked about what's happened in the past. What's your vision, your hope for the next decade when it comes to men and manhood?
Mm. Hmm. My vision is that we, you know, really begin to look at what are the things that are important to us. How do we want to feel? How do we want to be in the world? How do we want our relationships to be? Like, what is the legacy, you know, that I want to leave behind? And then as we create who we're being, then we act from there. So, you know, as opposed to, you know, chasing the carrot and just trying to earn a bunch of money so I can be happy. It's no, like, what's the difference that I want to make? How to, and that could be, you know, any level. You know, it doesn't have to be like on a stage in front of thousands of people. It literally can be like this one client of mine. Like, he just wants his family to know that they're number one for him. Like,
Nice.
that's what's most important to him. So then, okay, cool. So you're being, you know, family. You're being family unit, strong family unit. So then what? And that looks like, you know, once a week they go and they do something specific together. It means that, like, he comes home from work, helps them with their homework. You know, whatever, you know, that happens to be for him, but that we become really focused on, like, how we want to show up and what is the impact we want to have.
Do you have any great concern for men as we enter the next decade?
Um, I wouldn't say concern. I really, you know, my stand and my commitment is that we just keep. I don't mean this in a negative way, but we keep evolving. Like, we keep looking at, you know, how can I be better? What would that look like? What is the ideal life that I want for myself, right? It's not even about for anybody else. It's like, what do I want for myself? I want to be happy. I want to feel loved. I want to express love. I want the people around me to know that I got their back and that they're safe with me, like that for me. So I want, my intention, is that men, everybody, not just men, but men, discover that for themselves, or at least start looking at that.
Excellent. Well, this is a great conversation. Thank you for taking time out of your positive, productive schedule.
Thank you.
Do you have any closing thoughts, and how can people get in touch with you if they want to find out more?
Yeah, thank you. Coachwithmatthewsolomon.com is my website. I'm actually, I have a men's course that I'm going to be launching in the new year. So if you go to my website, there's a Dr. Vibe photo on there. You just click on that, send me an email, and I'll keep you posted on that course. But I really, I over the last year or so, I get a lot of questions about how can men navigate Me Too? How can we show up? What is okay to do? How do we deal with, false allegations? How do we handle consent conversations? Because they feel awkward. So I'm going to do an online course, a live course where we just get
Wow.
into that and we address it. And so that's coming in the new year.
So as Matthew has done some teasing, because he will be coming on the Dr. Vibe show and talking a little bit about that. He's not going to give the whole course on the Dr. Vibe show, but definitely very excited, and hopefully I can be part of that, because I think it's very, very important in regards to that, and I think that's going to be a very powerful course. Before we leave, what made you think about launching this course?
It's a combination of things. Again, it's, I get asked those questions a lot. I'm invited into Facebook groups and on panels to help support, and answer questions. And then, frankly, there's a lot of women who message me, who see the content that I put out and see the work that I'm doing. And they're like, thank you for what you're doing. If there's any way that you can reach more men, that would be awesome. And so, like, that's kind of how the book came about. My book was, I was just having conversations with men about this stuff. And then
what's the title of the book? Tell everybody.
Yeah, it's called Man's School: Relating with Women in the Me Too Era. And that's on my website also. So that came about because I was in these conversations and people were like, would you please write a book or teach a class or something? And so I wrote the book. And now I have the course.
And probably more appearances on top of it
too.
Yeah. Hopefully. We're speaking that. Well, that's fantastic. Again, I'd like to thank Matthew for taking time in his positive, productive schedule. He will be back in the new year. So don't worry, don't fret. They'll have more to share with you in the new year. I am Dr. Vibe. I'm host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe show, the home of Epic Conversations. I'm the host of Epic Conversations, 2018 award winner when it comes to innovation given out by the Canadian Ethnic Media Association. If you want to find out more about me, the best place to go is my home. And it's my website address, which is thedrvibeshow.com. Everything you want to know you'll be able to watch or listen to all my over 1,000, more than thousands of conversations, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, the different platforms that I'm on is all there. I said I was going to make this change in 2020. I said, let's get to the short right now, make the change before 2020. So that's how you can get in touch with me and find out what I'm doing. But as always, I will keep going with this, how I end my conversations. Live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Next up, sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. Block assumptions and aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. I also want to thank some people who jumped on during the conversation. I'd like to thank Lisa and Faye that jumped on Get Vocal. Also, Melvin Lars that jumped on the Facebook Live. And we had someone jump on YouTube, but they didn't identify themselves, so no worry. And I know there'll be others that watch this live that if I forgot you, it was my head, not my heart. And there also will be a replay available. I'd like to say thank everyone for watching. I'd like to wish you a blessed and highly favored rest of 2019 and a very prosperous next decade. And I'm challenging everybody to say, what are the 3 things you're going to achieve in your next decade? Good night,
Mm.
everybody. God bless. Peace be well and keep the faith.